We'll take a moment of personal privilege. Reverend John Churcher is completing his cancer treatments at this time, and I'm going to go over to England to spend a week with him. I leave after I preach here on June 2nd and then go the next day. On June 8th, I'll be speaking in Exeter, England, at a secular liturgies conference. And so our listeners in that part of England, and we're driving 3 hours from London to be there. So if you're in that part of England, please do join us for this conference. And I'll be taking your well wishes to John, who is a friend to all of us. One of the first times that I got in trouble in church, believe it or not, was in my very first year in ministry, when I failed to preach a Mother's Day sermon on Mother's Day. My rural Kentucky congregation was shocked, I tell you, by my insensitivity. I had a whole bag of reasons that I offered in self-defense. I was 22 and full of wisdom, and I told them that I was a biblical preacher and that Mother's Day is not in the Bible. I later excuse my uncommon refusal to talk about Mother's Day by the more pastoral awareness that there are very many people who don't have a particularly good feeling about this greeting card holiday. Some are women who always wanted to be a mother but never had the chance to be. Others are mothers or children who are estranged from one another. Some have recently lost their mother, and some mothers have lost a child. All of which spelled some real need to just not assume that everyone was feeling the same loving and respectful nostalgia on this day that everyone else did. It's difficult to simultaneously give the accolades that loving and sacrificial mothers deserve while consoling all of those who spent years in the greeting card aisle looking for a card that, rather than saying, "You were always there for me," or "You'll always be my best friend," and are instead looking for a card that says, "You're my mom." So applause for the mothers who loved, encouraged, emboldened, and defended your young. Congratulations to those of you who won the mom lottery. Just try to be aware that your experience is not only not universal, it may not even be normative. And for the rest of us, the first round is on me. But if I may be allowed to go behind the curtain of the original sentiment of Mother's Day, that's really more about appreciating women generally than it is throwing roses at women for doing the one thing that men can never do. In the 21st century, I'm less concerned about applauding the often invisible and underappreciated work of mothers and housekeepers, as laudable as that obviously is. But what concerns me in 2019 is the women who go to office buildings and businesses and do the same work as men and yet are paid significantly less. There have been arenas of real progress over the past half century. Discrimination is harder to hide in union shops where there is a specific job description, or in government employment where it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, you're going to make the exact same salary. But even when you take those equal pay situations into account, on average, women still make significantly less than men who are doing the same jobs. And you'll see some slightly different figures about this because there's not that many union jobs and the federal government doesn't employ that many people. So it could be 83 cents on the dollar or 77 cents on the dollar, depending upon how you look at it. But still, no matter how you slice it, it ain't fair, is it? Before their romance began, when Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski were becoming very popular morning news co-hosts, Mika became aware that Joe was making 14 times as much money as she was. Of course, Joe was making $8 million a year, so even at 1/14th, her salary was nothing to sneeze at. But the incongruity was so outrageous that it has spawned a whole industry of know your value books and conferences in which she is encouraging women to fight for more equitable compensation. And it's true enough that pay differences in the whole of Hollywood and TV industries has been nothing short of criminal. But I'm more concerned about the millions of employed women who are not famous, who are not, like Mika was, fighting the injustice of only making $500,000 a year when the guy next to her was making $8 million. It was wrong, but still, when I hear Mika say that she couldn't afford to pay her babysitter or keep her wardrobe up to date, I still throw up in my mouth a little bit. It's a little overstated. Where people like us want to stick our fork into the injustice shown to women, to daughters, to aunts, mothers, and nieces, is the fact that in family-owned businesses, there is not only a gender gap, but there is a racial pay gap as well. In the average office where a white man makes a buck, the white woman next to him makes 77 cents, a black woman makes 64 cents, and a Latina woman makes 56 cents. The difference between $500,000 and $8 million a year is unjust, it's unfair, it's indefensible, while being misogynist and insulting. But the difference between making $15 an hour and making $8 an hour can be the difference between barely getting by and suffering the full ravages of the violence of poverty. None of this is hard to see. I dare say that there is no one here, there's no one listening to our podcasts or our videos or watching this on YouTube who doesn't get the point. And I doubt that there is anyone who would make the mistake of tuning into one of my broadcasts that would even want to argue the point. So why, in 94 years of trying, have we not passed the Equal Rights Amendment in the United States? Now, on the wonky side of this, it takes 38 states to ratify an amendment to the Constitution for it to pass. In the 1970s, when I first started college, it looked like it was going to pass. We got up to 35 states. But then, that's where it stopped. Until 2017, just 2 years ago, Nevada became the 36th state, and last year, Illinois became the 37th. So now we just need one more, right? And Missouri is one of the states that has not ratified the ERA, and that's why we hear about it constantly in the news, and our governor and legislature talk about it all the time. Or not. The states that we are waiting for are predictably our own and our immediate neighbors, Arkansas and Oklahoma, our political cousins in Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North and South Carolina, and of course, Utah, and then, quite surprisingly, Virginia. Again, as much as many people like to say that there really isn't much difference between Democratic and Republican parties, it is simply a fact, as uncomfortable as it may be to say it out loud, is that all 13 states that have refused to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment are controlled by Republican legislatures. Now, I spent the first 30 years that I was in the ministry never putting a political sign in my yard and never commenting on any candidate and trying my best to believe that there were good people on both sides of the fence. But facts are stubborn things. It's not that we have a good party and a bad party in our two-party system. It's that we've got one party that is pro-business, pro-military, a party that fosters a tax and economic system that favors the rich and damages workers, and then we have the Republican Party that does all of that and adds misogyny, homophobia, and xenophobia to the mix. I'm inclined to believe that Plato was right. We should be ruled by philosopher kings. If we were, we would have a judicial system that was just, an economy that was fair, and we could root out prejudice. Of course, you would then have to listen to your politicians quoting Kierkegaard and Bertrand Russell all the time, so everybody would still complain. I know what that feels like. But I digress. Legislators in these conservative-controlled states go into hysterics saying how our country would simply fall apart if women were guaranteed constitutional equality. But the fact is that we are the only Western democracy that doesn't have a provision for equal rights in our Constitution. The French Constitution provides that the law guarantees in all spheres the rights of women must be equal to the rights of men. The German Constitution provides that men and women have equal rights and that nobody shall be prejudiced or favored because of their sex. The Constitution of India provides that the state shall not discriminate on the basis of sex. And you know, after World War II, when we were basically dictating constitutions to the nations that were on the losing side of the war, in every single instance, we included a provision for gender equality. We just never brought it home. We insisted that Germany and Japan and other states included in their constitution. We've just never gotten it into our own. Now, experts in this field say that 94% of Americans favor gender equality. So why hasn't it passed? And their answer to that is that most people think we've already got it. But when it comes up in legislatures in these 13 states that are holding out, there's just a handful of largely right-wing religious misogynists that are keeping these southern states locked into a 14th century mentality. It won't always be this way. I was in Jefferson City this week with several of you and hundreds of others from around the state to lobby our legislature to restore Medicare reimbursements to Planned Parenthood for medical care given to poor women. Now, of course, conservatives try to paint Planned Parenthood as all they do is abortions and just skip the fact that they do cancer screenings and all kinds of other health-related things for women. And so Planned Parenthood is still delivering these health services to women, but they are being kept from receiving Medicare payments for providing these services. They're still just depending upon donors, private donors, to cover all of those costs. So we all went up there to lobby the legislature, and it was, I don't know, Andrew and Rebecca, if you agree with me, but I think it was a little bit too nice. We should have been somewhat more disruptive. I like to make, if I'm going to drive that far away, I like to kind of make a scene. But I didn't actually get to speak to our representatives, but if I had, what I wanted to say to him is that I'm not asking them to switch parties. The Republican Party almost never asks me for advice, but if they did, I would point out to them that they need to think of the future Republican Party and not the past Republican Party. The next generation of Republican voters will probably still be pro-business. I mean, every country, regardless of the nomenclature, has a labor party and a business party. That's kind of the way politics breaks down in democracies. But the next generation of Republican voters will still be concerned about keeping taxes low and be pro-business environment, but they will not perpetuate this anti-woman, anti-gay, anti-immigrant, racist crap that has mobilized voters in their base over the past 2 generations. Those people are quickly exiting the political scene and going to some version of what we call memorial gardens. So no matter how hard they may be trying in North and South Carolina, it is becoming increasingly difficult to vote from the graveyard. What I would like to say to my legislator, who is a man about my age who learned about government by doing swimming pool maintenance, I guess the Harvard Kennedy School was full when he applied. I would say to him, Craig, if you want to keep being reelected for enough terms to draw a pension from the state of Missouri, you're going to have to think about future Republican voters more than you think about past Republican voters. I have all but given up on compassion and reason out of our legislature, but surely some measure of enlightened self-interest is bound to be persuasive at some level. Now, 20 years ago, I found myself toe-to-toe with a conservative Catholic president of our local state university who was at that time refusing to consider including sexual orientation in the university's employment policy. Because, you know, Jesus wouldn't want the same-sex partner of one college professor to get the same health care as the heterosexual professor across the hall was able to afford to her or his opposite sex partner. Because, you know, Christianity and stuff. It's probably in the Bible somewhere, I'm guessing, first opinions or final opinions or something like that. But I caught myself before I started yelling and realized how very pathetic it was for a man in his position to be trying to defend the position that he was defending. And I told him, you know, John, you've already lost. You're already on the wrong side of history. Justice will come to the gay members of your staff, either now or in the very near future when we remove you from this office. Amen. And that is where we had to leave it. And as you know, I was right and he was wrong. And that happens more often than you might think. You may recall that Missouri was the first state in the Union to pass a constitutional amendment in 2004 defining marriage as being between a man and a woman. We led the way in denying civil rights to 10% of our own population. We are now one of the 13 holdouts preventing the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, and I would love to see Missouri go from being the first to institutionalize homophobia 15 years ago to being the last state to push the ERA over the goal line. What I saw in Jeff City this week did not give me much hope. And it may be that Virginia will do this fall what we have not been able to do these past 94 years. But whether it's Virginia or Missouri or Utah, we have already won. The mentality of patriarchy will fall, and America will join the ranks of the rest of the civilized world. But now let's not be naive. Passing an amendment will not change the way that people think overnight, just like the 2015 Supreme Court decision to legalize same-sex marriage did not end all discrimination against gay people, but it was an important milestone. And it held the door open to changes in society. It set our feet on the path of progress. And that's what passing the ERA will do for us. I am aware that today, those of you fortunate enough to still have your mother living and get to spend time with your mother, that you're probably going to take them out for a really nice lunch somewhere. Maybe even you got a nice card or flowers. I just want you to remember today that when this Mother's Day is over, what your mother really wants is equal rights.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.